The rain beat upon the window pane, drowning out the sound of his tears. His fingers traced the outline of the figure in the picture he held in his hands. It was of his mother, wearing a black leotard and white tights as she performed an arabesque, frozen in time. Of all the pictures, this was the one he loved the most. He was living with strangers, the foster system having relegated him to this place. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender polish, the kind the woman insisted on using for every surface she controlled. She stood near the mirror, arms folded, watching the young man fidget beneath her gaze. The leotard lay on the back of the chair, sleek, black, and impossibly small-looking, like it belonged to someone who already understood who they were supposed to be. "Put it on," she said, her voice soft in the way that left no room for refusal. He hesitated, fingers twitching, eyes drifting to the door as if escape might materialize if he stared hard enough. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see his own nervous reflection in her pupils. "You promised," she reminded him gently, "and he'll be here soon." The mention of the other man tightened something in his chest. He didn't know what the woman truly wanted: approval, control, amusement, transformation. She guided people the way a puppeteer guided string, elegantly, invisibly, relentlessly. He picked up the leotard. The fabric felt cold at first, then warm as it yielded to his grip. When he pulled it over his shoulders, the mirror caught the tremor in his hands. She moved behind him, brushing his hair away from his face with deliberate care, as though she were preparing an actress for a scene, not forcing him into a role he didn't understand. "There," she murmured. "Now they'll see what I see." He looked at her in the mirror, her calm smile, her satisfaction, the strange pride in her eyes. A girl's silhouette stared back from his own body, uncertain and fragile, caught somewhere between who he was and who she intended him to be. A knock sounded at the door. The woman's smile widened. Showtime. He stood by the vanity as if it were an altar he'd been dragged to. The woman circled him slowly, the way an instructor circles a student who has already disappointed her before the lesson even begins. "You're slouching," she said. "If you're going to pretend, at least pretend properly. I don't want to—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "We're past what you want. Sit." He sat, the chair cold beneath him. She opened a drawer and laid out the tools of transformation one by one: foundation, powder, a small palette of muted pinks, a sharp eyeliner pencil that looked almost like a threat. "You're shaking," she observed, not unkindly. "Relax your face." When he didn't, she took his chin between her fingers and tilted his head upward, forcing his gaze toward the mirror. He didn't recognize the person looking back, barefaced, frightened, waiting. "You know why he's coming," she said, brushing foundation across his cheekbones with a precision that felt more like control than care. "You know what he expects. And you know what I expect." He clenched his hands in his lap. She noticed. Unclenched, she warned. He obeyed. She moved to his eyes next, lifting his eyelid with her thumb. The eyeliner traced a dark line that made his breath catch, not because it hurt, but because each stroke sealed him a little deeper into a role he had no say in. "Look at you," she murmured, stepping back to examine her work. "You're almost convincing." He swallowed. "Please, I don't want him to see me like this." "Well," she said, brushing a final sweep of blush across his cheek, "you should have thought about that before you agreed to my help, before you let me put this much work into you." Her smile was thin and satisfied. She reached for the leotard again, smoothing it across his shoulders, adjusting it until it fit the way she pictured, not the way he felt. A knock echoed through the apartment. He froze. She leaned in close and whispered near his ear, "You will stand up, you will greet him, and you will not undo what I've put you into." Her hand lingered on his shoulder, firm, unmoving. "Because you know what happens if you disobey." Another knock, more insistent. She straightened, smoothing her skirt. "Time to show him," she said. The knock sounded again, louder this time, as though the man on the other side already sensed hesitation within the walls. The woman didn't look back at the young man when she opened the door. Her posture shifted into something poised, coldly welcoming, almost formal. The man who entered was tall, wearing an expression carved from impatience. His eyes scanned the apartment once, then fixed sharply on the young man sitting rigidly before the vanity. "So," the man said, "this is what you've done with him." The young man felt exposed under the stranger's gaze. Not because of the leotard, not because of the makeup, though both made his skin prickle, but because the man seemed to appraise him like an unfinished project someone had promised to deliver. "He's compliant," the woman said, closing the door softly, but only with supervision. The man stepped closer. Each footfall felt deliberate, measured. the sound of someone used to being obeyed. He stopped just in front of the young man, studying his face the way one studies an object for flaws. "Look at me," the man ordered. The young man's gaze lifted automatically fear, reflex, something conditioned by the woman's steady pressure. The man's expression didn't soften. "You don't want to be here, do you?" he asked. The young man swallowed but didn't answer. The woman spoke for him. "He knows what happens if he refuses." The man's attention flicked to her. "You said he'd cooperate, and he will." Her voice sharpened like a blade being drawn. "He just needs reinforcement." The man crouched slightly, so his eyes were level with the young man's. "You understand that this isn't optional," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "What she set in motion can't simply be undone." The young man felt his pulse hammering, trapped between their expectations like a moth pinned to a board. The woman stepped behind him again, resting a hand on his shoulder. The gesture looked gentle to an outsider. To him, it felt like a shackle. "Stand up," she commanded. His legs obeyed before his mind did. The man nodded, satisfied with the show of obedience. "Better," he said. "Much better." The woman's smile sharpened. "You see?" she said to the man. "He just needs the right pressure." The young man felt the room closing in, the makeup on his skin suddenly heavy, the leotard too tight, the air too thin. He couldn't tell which of the two was more dangerous, the woman who shaped him, or the man who judged the result. But he knew one thing with perfect clarity: they were not finished with him. Not yet. The room felt quieter after the man's judgment settled in the air. No one spoke at first. The woman kept her hand on the young man's shoulder, not forcing, but holding him in place, anchoring him, or trapping him. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Finally, the young man exhaled, a long, trembling breath that seemed to drain the resistance from his posture. "Fine," he murmured. The word was barely audible, but both of them heard it. The woman's hand eased, just a fraction. "Fine what?" she asked. He didn't lift his eyes from the floor. I'll do it. I'll go further." The man's expression tightened, not with triumph, but with expectation. "What changed your mind?" The young man didn't know how to answer. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the weight of fighting had become heavier than the weight of giving in. Or maybe, deep down, a small part of him wondered what it would be like to stop running from the role they kept pushing him toward. He finally said, "I'm tired of arguing." The woman exchanged a glance with the man, quiet, calculating. Then she stepped away and opened the wardrobe. Inside, hung like an artifact behind glass, was the wedding dress. Satin, structured, immaculate. Beneath it, folded neatly, lay the corset, cream-coloured, stiff, meant to reshape posture and breath. She lifted the corset first and held it out to him. "You'll put this on," she said. "Not because I force you, because you said you would." Her gaze pinned him more firmly than her hands ever had. The young man reached for it. His fingers hesitated at the boning, the unfamiliar rigidity of it. He expected fear to spike in him again, but instead, there was a strange calm, a surrender maybe, or a curiosity he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. He slipped the corset around his torso. The woman moved behind him, tightening the laces with steady, practiced pulls. Each tug straightened his spine, narrowed his waist, shaped him until his breath came shallow, but controlled. "You see?" she murmured near his ear. "You can become what's asked of you." The wedding dress followed cool satin, heavy with symbolism, laid carefully over his arms. He stepped into it slowly, almost ceremonially. The bodice settled over the corset. The skirt flowed around his legs like water. The man watched silently, arms crossed. But something in his stare had shifted. It wasn't impatience anymore. It was appraisal, and something close to approval. When the woman fastened the final clasp, she turned him toward the mirror. He stared. He had expected humiliation, or alienation, something inside him to revolt. Instead, he saw someone he almost recognized, a version of himself that had been pulled from him rather than imposed onto him. The man spoke first. "Do you accept it?" The young man took a breath short, shaped by the corset, and nodded. "Yes." The woman smiled softly this time, not sharply. "Good," she said. "Then we can begin." They conducted the ceremony in the living room, though it had been rearranged until it no longer resembled one. The curtains were drawn tight, lamps were dimmed. A single circle of light fell across the young man, illuminating the wedding dress that clung to the shape the corset had forced him into. The man stood at the far end of the room like an officiant in a ceremony that had no church, no congregation, no legitimacy-only intention. The woman guided the young man forward with a hand placed firmly at the small of his back. "You'll stand here," she said, positioning him in the center of the light. He obeyed, breath shallow, fingers tight around the skirt of the dress. The man opened a small black notebook a prop, or maybe something real, and spoke with the flat authority of someone who expected obedience to sound natural. "We gather," he began, "to formalize the commitment you have agreed to." The young man's stomach clenched. He hadn't agreed. Not freely, but they treated his earlier surrender as consent. The woman stepped beside him, hands folded, eyes bright with triumph. The man continued, "You will repeat the words I give you. They are symbolic, nothing more, but symbols hold power." The young man swallowed. His throat felt too narrow. "Do you understand?" the man asked. He nodded. He couldn't seem to do anything else. The man read the first line slowly, deliberately. "I vow to honor the role chosen for me." The woman's gaze burned into him, expectant. He hesitated, but the silence felt like a trap. "I vow to honor the role chosen for me." The words tasted strange in his mouth, like admitting to something he wasn't sure he believed. The man turned a page. "I vow to obey the guidance given to shape me." The young man's breath hitched. He could feel the corset pressing tight, reminding him he had allowed himself to be reshaped physically and otherwise. But the woman leaned in just slightly, her presence a silent command. "I vow to obey the guidance given to shape me." The man nodded once, satisfied. The next line was softer, almost gentle. "I vow to accept the self they see in me, until I learn to see it myself." Something in the young man loosened not acceptance, but a raw ache of confusion. Was this who he was becoming, or who they were molding him into? He forced the words out. "I vow to accept the self they see in me, until I learn to see it myself." The man closed the notebook. "It is done," he said. The woman stepped in front of the young man and lifted his chin with her fingers. "You've taken the first step," she whispered. "Now you belong to the path we've given you." Her smile was not cruel, this time only certain. The young man stood in the wedding dress, breath tight, vows still echoing in the room. He wasn't sure if he felt bound or simply untethered. But one thing was clear. They believed the ceremony changed everything. And maybe against his better judgment, a small part of him wondered if they were right. The apartment was quiet after the ceremony, the oppressive theatrics gone with the dimmed lights. The woman and man had stepped into the kitchen, murmuring to each other in low, satisfied tones. The young man remained where they left him, standing in the dress, the vows still echoing in his head. He hadn't expected what came next. A strange, calm, soft, tentative settled over him like a veil. Not acceptance of them, not obedience, not surrender, but something inward, something he hadn't felt while resisting. Room to think. He approached the mirror again. The makeup was still unfamiliar, the corset still constricting. The wedding dress still felt like an exaggeration of someone else's fantasy. But the person in the mirror wasn't as alien as before. He tilted his head slightly. The reflection responded. The movement, delicate and controlled, didn't look wrong. "Is this really me?" he wondered. "Or just what they shaped me into?" But the question didn't scare him as much this time. He lifted his hands to the bodice, feeling the smooth satin under his fingertips. Not with panic, with curiosity. The silhouette the corset created, narrower, straighter, fragile and upright, should have felt like a cage. Instead, it felt like a costume he could choose how to inhabit. He whispered to himself, "Barely audible I look. Different. Not good. Not bad. Just different." He took a deeper breath even if the corset resisted, and let it out slowly. For the first time since the woman had pulled him into this strange world, he wondered what he might look like if he softened, instead of fought. If he chose details on his own terms. If femininity wasn't a punishment, but something he could examine without fear. A thought crept in, cautious and surprising. Maybe I don't hate this. His heart pounded at the admission, though no one had heard it. No commands, no threats, just the quiet idea forming in the space they had accidentally given him. From the kitchen, the woman's voice carried faintly. "He's starting to understand." The man's reply, or starting to decide. The young man turned away from the mirror before they returned, but the afterimage stayed with him, a version of himself softened, reshaped, but maybe not broken. Maybe becoming feminine didn't have to mean losing himself. Maybe it could mean finding a part of him he'd never had permission to look at before. That night, after the ceremony's echoes faded, and the woman and man retreated into their own quiet satisfaction, the young man remained awake. The wedding dress lay draped across a chair. The corset rested on the vanity like a shed skin. He stood in the dim light, barefaced now after washing away the makeup, but still feeling its memory traced across his features. He expected guilt, or shame, or the old resistance. Instead, he felt clarity, not about them, about himself. He replayed the moment in the mirror, how he had looked when he wasn't fighting, how his shoulders had settled, how his expression had softened, how the reflection, strange yet undeniable, hadn't frightened him. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't the ceremony. It was the way something inside him had stirred for the first time with an ache he recognized only now. This feels like me. Quietly, he picked up the corset again. He didn't put it on, he simply held it, tracing the boning with thoughtful fingers. Not trapped, not controlled. Curious. A soft knock came at his door. The woman stepped inside, but slowly this time, without authority. Her posture was cautious, unsure. "You're still awake," she said. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He wasn't afraid anymore. "I've been thinking," he said. Her silence invited him to continue. "What happened before? The pressure, the ceremony, that wasn't right." He said it calmly, firmly. She flinched a little. "But," he added, "it pushed me to look at something I've been ignoring for a long time, something I'm choosing to look at now." He faced her fully. "I liked how I felt. Not because you made me do it, because I finally let myself see it." Her expression softened, not triumphant, not manipulative, just surprised. "You're saying this is something you want?" she asked gently. He nodded, slowly. "Yes, but on my terms, not yours, not his." She lowered her eyes, not in shame, but in acknowledgement. "That's fair," she murmured. "More than fair." He set the corset down carefully, almost reverently. "I don't know what this identity looks like yet," he said. "I don't know what parts I'll keep or change, but I want to find out. Me, not the version you invented." She hesitated. "Then, I can help," she offered softly. "If you want help." He considered her for a long moment. Her eyes held no command, now only possibility. "Yes," he said at last. "But this time, you follow my lead." A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Then we'll start slowly," she said, thoughtfully, together. He felt something lift in his chest light, warm, terrifying in its honesty. Not submission, not fear, ownership. For the first time, the identity he was stepping into felt like something that belonged to him and no one else. The morning light spilled into the apartment, soft and steady, warming the air instead of tightening it. He woke slowly, stretching, aware of the way the night's clarity still settled comfortably inside him. The path ahead wasn't fully formed, but it was his, and for the first time, that was enough. He dressed deliberately, choosing clothes that felt gentler, lighter. A soft blouse, simple earrings, hair brushed forward to frame his face. Not a costume, not a demand, a decision. When he stepped into the living room, the woman and man were already there. They both paused when they saw him, but it wasn't the assessing silence of before. It was something quieter, respectful. The woman's eyes warmed. "You look comfortable," she said carefully, like testing a word she hoped was the right one. "I do," he answered. The man nodded once, an acknowledgement, not possession. "You've chosen well," he said. "You seem settled." He wasn't sure about settled, but he felt aligned, closer to the person he had been circling, afraid to name. He took a breath, then said the words that had taken shape overnight. "I'd like you both to see me differently now, not as someone you're trying to shape, but as the person I've chosen to be." The woman stepped closer, hands clasped, expression soft. "And who is that?" she asked gently. He hesitated, not out of fear, but because naming something makes it real. "I want to live as," he swallowed, "as your daughter." The room held the silence like something fragile and precious. The woman's face broke into a slow, luminous smile, not triumphant, not manipulative, but proud, in a way he hadn't expected. The man's posture softened, tension easing from his shoulders. "If that's who you are," the woman said, "then that's who you are. And we'll treat you as such," the man added, voice steady. "Not because we decided it, because you did." Something warm expanded in the young woman's chest, and for the first time, the word felt right. Woman. She wasn't flawless, she wasn't finished, but she was stepping into herself. They spent the rest of the morning together, quietly rewriting the rhythms of their life, not as controllers and subject, but as a family learning new shapes. The woman showed her how to style her hair in ways that framed her face gently. The man, unexpectedly patient, helped adjust a blouse she liked so it fit better with her changing silhouette. No one pushed, no one commanded. They followed her lead. Later, when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, she paused. There she was, not the boy they had pressured, not the frightened figure in the dress, but someone with soft lines and steady eyes. Someone who felt, finally, like a possible future. She whispered to her reflection, "This is me." And for once, the quiet answered back with certainty.